It's minus 23 degrees outside, and my uncle had just left my grandmother on my front step, like a piece of furniture he didn't want anymore. I didn't know that yet. I was still asleep. It was the notification from my Ring doorbell that woke me up at 6:47 in the morning. That little buzz on my phone that I usually ignore when it's just a delivery. But something made me look. Maybe it was the time. Maybe it was sentiment. I can't explain. I opened the app half asleep and saw the footage from my front porch, and I sat up so fast, I knocked my glass of water off the nightstand. My grandmother was standing in the dark in her winter coat. The coat she'd had for 15 years, the thin wool one with the missing button on the third clasp. She had one small rolling suitcase beside her and a plastic grocery bag in each hand. And she was just standing there, not knocking, not moving, just standing. Like she didn't know she was allowed to. I was at the door in under a minute. The cold hit me the second I opened it. That kind of cold that gets into your chest before you even had time to breathe. She turned when she heard the latch and the look on her face. That's the part I still can't shake. She looked embarrassed. Not scared, not angry. Embarrassed. Like she was sorry for being there. "Graham," I said. I didn't know what else to say. "I didn't want to ring," she said. "I thought you might be sleeping." She was 81 years old, standing in minus 23-degree weather at 6:45 in the morning, and she didn't want to bother me by ringing the bell. I got her inside. I got her coat off and her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and I sat across from her at my kitchen table in Thunder Bay and I waited. She talked slowly, the way she always does, pausing between sentences like she's making sure she gets it right. She told me that my uncle, her son, my mother's younger brother, had loaded her things into his car the night before. He told her he was taking her somewhere more suitable. That was the word he used, suitable. She said he drove for about 40 minutes, which would have been the drive from his place in Kakabeka Falls to mine, and that he carried her suitcase to the porch, put the grocery bags down, told her I'd be up soon, and driven away. She paused after she said that last part. "He didn't knock for you," I said. "No," she said. "He said you'd see me on the camera." I had to get up and stand at the sink for a moment. Not because I was going to cry. I just needed to be vertical. I needed to look at something ordinary. The faucet, the dish soap, the little cactus on the windowsill that I'd had for 3 years and somehow never killed. While my brain caught up with what she'd just told me. My uncle had driven his 81-year-old mother to my house in the dead of a northwestern Ontario winter, left her on the porch in the dark, and driven home. The footage showed she'd been standing there for 19 minutes before the notification woke me up. Here's the thing about my grandmother. Her name is Nora, and she's the kind of woman who sends birthday cards 3 days early and still makes her own bread on Sundays and remembers the names of every single one of my friends I've ever mentioned, even once, even in passing. She raised 4 kids largely on her own after my grandfather died in 1987. She worked as a bookkeeper for a hardware supply company in the Lakehead for 22 years. She is sharp and funny, and she taught me to play cribbage when I was 7. And she beats me at it to this day. She had savings. Not a huge amount, but real honest savings. The kind you build over decades of being careful. She told me once, a few years back, that she had just over $90,000 set aside. Her pension from the federal government, her CPP, her OAS. She wasn't rich, but she was stable. She owned her house. She was fine. Or she had been. My uncle had moved in with her 2 years ago. He told the family it was to help her out, to make sure she wasn't alone. My grandmother had seemed happy about it. She liked company. She'd always liked company. She'd always liked company. I was living in Thunder Bay by then, about an hour's drive away, and I called her twice a week and visited when I could. But I'd felt relieved, honestly, knowing someone was there with her. I should have paid closer attention. Over the next few days, sitting at my kitchen table while she slept in my spare room, I started asking her things, not interrogating her, just talking the way we always talk. And the picture that came together, slowly, piece by piece, made my stomach turn. About 18 months ago, my uncle had started talking to her about her finances. He told her that inflation was eating into her savings and that she needed to consolidate. He'd taken her to a notary and had her sign a power of attorney. Not a limited one, not a specific one, but a broad one. She hadn't fully understood what it meant. She trusted him. He was her son. After that, she stopped receiving her bank statements in the mail. He'd switched them to electronic and set up the email on his phone. She didn't have a smartphone. She didn't know how to check. The money didn't disappear all at once. It went slowly, the way these things always do when someone is being careful not to get caught. A transfer here. A withdrawal there. He cashed out her GICs before maturity, which cost her the interest she'd waited years to earn. He'd started collecting her OAS and CPP payments through the joint account he'd convinced her to open, telling her it was simpler to manage from one place. When I finally sat down with her and we went through everything she could remember, we figured that somewhere between $60,000 and $70,000 was gone. She looked at the notepad where I was writing things down and she said, very quietly, "I thought he was helping me." I didn't sleep that night. I want to be honest about what happened inside me during that week, because I don't think it was as clean as people imagine these situations are. I was angry, yes. I was furious in a way I'd never felt before, this deep, grinding fury that sat in my chest like a stone. But I was also scared. He was family. My mother's brother. My grandmother's son. I kept thinking about Christmas dinners and fishing trips and the way he used to make her laugh. I kept thinking about what this would do to her, to the whole family, if I pushed on it. And then I'd look at her, sitting at my table, reading a paperback novel with her reading glasses on the end of her nose, and I'd think about 19 minutes in minus 23-degree weather, and the stone in my chest got heavier. I called my boss at the hospital. I work as a registered practical nurse at the Regional Health Sciences Center, and told her I needed to take some personal leave. She didn't ask questions. I started making calls. The first call I made was to the Ontario Provincial Police non-emergency line. I explained what had happened, and they directed me to the Financial Crimes Unit. I spoke with a constable who took down what I told her and explained that for elder financial abuse under the criminal code, I would need documentation, bank records, transaction histories, a copy of the power of attorney, and ideally a statement from my grandmother. The second call I made was to a legal aid clinic in Thunder Bay that had a specific elder law stream. They connected me with a lawyer, a woman named... Actually, I'm not going to name her here, but she was extraordinary. She walked me through everything. She told me that a power of attorney can be challenged if there's evidence the person didn't fully understand what they were signing, or if they signed under pressure, or if the attorney has been acting outside their permitted scope. She also told me about the Substitute Decisions Act in Ontario and what it allows for in cases of financial exploitation. The third call I made was to Health Canada's Elder Abuse Line, which connects to provincial supports. They put me in touch with a community response worker here in Thunder Bay who specialized in exactly this. While I was making calls, I was also documenting. I have a habit of keeping records. I think it comes from nursing, from years of charting and documenting everything, and I applied that the same way here. I wrote down everything my grandmother told me, with dates where she could remember them. I took photographs of her belongings as they were when she arrived, the bags packed carelessly, things that hadn't made it in. I pulled up the ring footage and saved it to a secure drive. Then I called my grandmother's bank. This part took time. Because the account had been converted to a joint account and my uncle was listed, the branch couldn't just hand me records. But my grandmother came with me in person, with her original ID and her health card, and she asked to speak to the branch manager directly. She sat across from that manager. And I want to say this clearly because I am so proud of her. And she told him everything. She was calm. She was precise. She remembered more than I expected her to. The branch manager flagged the account for review and connected us with their elder financial abuse protocol team. My uncle called me the day after the bank visit. I don't know how he found out so quickly. Maybe a teller mentioned it. Maybe the system flagged something that notified him. I'm not sure. He called from his cell and I let it go to voicemail. And then I called him back from a different phone that I'd asked my coworker to lend me. I'd read enough about these situations to know that I wanted a record of any conversation we had, and I downloaded a call recording app and checked that it was legal under Canadian law to record a call you are a party to. He didn't know I was recording. He told me I was making a huge mistake. He said my grandmother was confused, that she had early cognitive decline and couldn't be trusted to remember financial conversations accurately. He said the money had been spent on her care, food, medication, home modifications. He said he'd done everything for her for 2 years, and I had no idea what that looked like up close. I let him talk. I asked him one question. I asked him if he would be willing to provide a full accounting of every transaction made from her accounts, since the power of attorney was signed. There was a long silence. I don't have to do that, he said. I know, I said. I'm just asking if you're willing to. He hung up. I sent the recording to the lawyer the same afternoon. The weeks that followed were exhausting in a way I struggled to describe. It wasn't dramatic, most of it. It was paperwork and phone calls and waiting and more paperwork. It was taking my grandmother to a geriatric assessment so a physician could document her cognitive status on record. She scored well, as I suspected she would. It was sitting in a law office, going through bank statements line by line, and watching my grandmother press her lips together when she saw certain amounts, not saying anything, just pressing her lips together. The community response worker connected us with a victim services coordinator at the OPP, who took over as our main point of contact. She was the one who told us that in addition to the criminal investigation, which she cautioned would take time, there was a concurrent civil process my grandmother could pursue to recover funds. There was also the question of the power of attorney itself. The lawyer we were working with filed an application to have it revoked on the basis that my grandmother had not received independent legal advice before signing, that she had not been made aware of the scope of what she was signing, and that there was documented evidence of financial exploitation by the attorney. She also flagged a specific transaction, a transfer of $12,000 made on a date when my grandmother had been in hospital for a minor procedure and was on medication, as particularly significant because capacity to make financial decisions during that period was legally questionable. My uncle did not cooperate. He hired his own lawyer. There were letters back and forth. My grandmother, to her credit, never wavered. She would come with me to every meeting, every appointment, and she would answer every question clearly and steadily. And when we walked out, she would say something like, "Well, that's done," and then ask if we could stop for a coffee somewhere. She is tougher than everyone has ever given her credit for. She has always been tougher than people give her credit for. The power of attorney was revoked by the court approximately 11 weeks after we filed. In the same order, I was appointed as my grandmother's legal guardian for financial decisions, not because she can't make them, but as a protective measure while the broader case proceeded. She still makes all her own decisions. I just have to co-sign anything significant, and no one else can touch her accounts. The day the order came through, I was at work. My phone buzzed in my scrubs pocket, and I stepped into the supply closet and read the email from the lawyer, and I stood there for a moment in the dark among the boxes of gloves and gauze, and I just breathed. Then I texted my grandmother, "It's done. You're protected." She texted back, "Good." She texted back, "Good. Come for dinner Sunday. I'm making stew." 2 weeks after that, my uncle showed up at my door. I want to be careful about this part because he is still, technically, family. But I also think it's important to be honest about what happened, because I think people need to know that these situations don't end cleanly just because the legal piece is resolved. He came on a Tuesday evening. I checked the ring footage before I opened the door, and I saw him standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground, and for a second, just a second, I felt something complicated. Because I could remember being a kid and him being the uncle who let me stay up late watching hockey. People are rarely only one thing. But I also remembered 19 minutes in the dark in -23 degrees. I cracked the door but didn't open it fully. He said he wanted to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said he'd made mistakes but he'd been overwhelmed, that taking care of their mother had been harder than anyone realized, that he'd had his own financial problems and had borrowed money with the intention of paying it back. "You can tell all of that to the investigator," I said. "I'm asking you to drop this," he said. "She's my mother. She's my grandmother," I said. "And she was standing on this porch in the dark for 19 minutes, and -23 degrees, and you didn't even knock on the door for her." He didn't say anything to that. "If you genuinely care about her," I said, "you'll cooperate fully with the investigation, and you'll work out with your lawyer how to make restitution. That's the path forward. That's the only conversation there is to have." I closed the door. He rang twice more over the next few days. I didn't answer. I documented each attempt and forwarded the log to the victim services coordinator, who noted it on file. The criminal investigation is still ongoing as I write this. I won't get into the specifics of where it stands, because that process has its own timeline and I've learned not to put a clock on it. What I can tell you is that my grandmother is safe. She is in my spare room right now, and she's been there since that morning in January, and we are figuring out together what her next chapter looks like. She wants to stay in Thunder Bay. She misses her garden. We're looking at a small apartment near the river, somewhere she can have a little outdoor space, somewhere close enough that I can check on her easily. Her accounts are in her name properly. Her OAS and CPP come to her directly. We've set up e-notifications on her account that go to both of us. We've made a list together of what she has and what she needs and what she wants. She gets her bank statements now. She reads them herself. She sits at my kitchen table with her reading glasses on, and she goes through every line, and sometimes she'll look up and tell me she thinks she's spending too much on groceries, and I'll tell her she's not spending nearly enough. And she'll roll her eyes at me the way she has since I was about 4 years old. If I could go back and change one thing, it wouldn't be the day she showed up on my porch. I couldn't have changed that. It would be 2 years earlier. It would be paying closer attention when she told me he'd moved in. It would be asking more questions. It would be driving up to Kakabeka more often. I know other people are in this right now. Other families. I know because the victim services coordinator told me how many calls they get, and I know because I've had 3 separate conversations since the footage circulated with people who told me something similar was happening with their own parents or their own grandparents. So I want to be clear about the steps, because I wish someone had told me. Call the OPP Financial Crimes Line, or your local equivalent. Ask specifically about elder financial abuse under Section 331 of the Criminal Code. Contact your provincial elder law clinic. In Ontario, legal aid has dedicated streams. Go to the bank in person with your family member. Document everything with dates, and if there's a power of attorney involved, get a lawyer to look at the signing circumstances. A power of attorney is only valid if the person genuinely understood what they were signing. These are not small things to do. I know that. It is hard and it is long, and there are days when the paperwork feels endless and the outcome feels uncertain, and you wonder if you're making things worse by pushing. But I kept thinking about something my grandmother said to me about a week after she arrived. I'd apologized to her. I'm not totally sure what I was apologizing for, maybe just for the whole situation. And she looked at me over her mug of tea and said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You got up when the camera went off." She's right. That's all I did. I got up when the camera went off. She was still there. That's the part that mattered. I keep coming back to the 19 minutes. Not the bank statements, not the court order, not even the moment I closed the door in his face. Though all of those stay with me too. It's the 19 minutes that I return to most. 19 minutes that my grandmother stood on a dark porch in the cold because she didn't want to ring the bell. Because somewhere along the way, someone had made her feel like her presence was an inconvenience. Like she needed to apologize for existing. That's not something that happens overnight. That's the result of small erosions, over time, by someone she trusted completely. I've thought a lot about what made it possible for this to happen to her. She wasn't naive, she wasn't frail. She is one of the sharpest, most capable people I know. But she was trusting, and she was alone. And someone who should have protected her chose instead to take advantage of both of those things. What he did wasn't just financially wrong. It was a failure of basic decency, the kind that doesn't need a law to define it, because it lives in you before any law ever gets written down. You either have it or you don't. The decision to exploit someone you love, someone who depends on you, doesn't happen because of circumstance. It happens because of character. And character, I've come to believe, is exactly what saves you in situations like the one I found myself in. Because here's what I know about how this unfolded. Nothing that worked would have worked without understanding what I was actually dealing with. I had to learn fast what a power of attorney actually means, what the Substitute Decisions Act covers, what Adult Protective Services can and can't do, what documentation of financial crimes unit actually means. I had no idea about most of that before January. I had to figure it out in real time, while also keeping my grandmother fed and calm and feeling like she hadn't made a mistake by being on my porch. Knowledge mattered. Not the abstract kind, the specific, applied, unglamorous kind that comes from calling the right office and asking the right question and writing down the answer. And then there was just the sheer grinding work of not giving up. There were days when I genuinely didn't know if anything I was doing would amount to anything. The process was slow. The outcome was uncertain. There were moments when the easier path, let it go, keep the peace, avoid the family fracture, felt very real. I want to be honest about that, because I think anyone in a similar situation deserves to hear it. It was hard, it stayed hard, and you have to keep going anyway. What carried me through more than anything else was her. Watching Nora sit across from a bank manager and tell her story clearly and steadily. Watching her read the court order and then ask if we could go for coffee. She modeled something for me that I didn't have a word for at the time, but I call it quiet persistence. The kind that doesn't need an audience and doesn't require things to feel fair before it keeps moving. I got up when the camera went off. That was the first step, but she's the reason every step after that was worth taking. The consequences my uncle is facing now are not something I engineered. They're the natural result of choices he made met by choices I made in response. That's all this ever was. Two sets of decisions, playing out to their conclusions. I hope Nora gets her garden this summer.